Hey guys, tonight we're biting off more than we can chew literally. We're plunging fork first into the terrifying, tragic and taste bud torturing world of medieval food. Or, as I like to call it, why you would starve in medieval times. Think of tonight as a sleep story, a comedy, and a public service announcement for why you should never complain about instant ramen again. Before we tuck into this feast of historical misery, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below telling me where you're listening from and what the worst thing you've ever eaten was. Don't worry, whatever it was. You've got nothing on 14th century stew. Now dim the lights, turn on a fan for that soothing background noise, and get comfortable. Maybe grab a snack, unless you want to really immerse yourself in the spirit of tonight's story, in which case, grab a raw turnip and a stale crust of bread. Let's pause for a second. What did people really eat in the Middle Ages? Was the bread really that hard? Why did the water try to kill you? How do you make a meal out of turnips, sawdust, and pure existential dread? Would you even survive a week, or would you immediately offend a goose and starve before breakfast? Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1325. Your stomach is rumbling, your nose is already offended, and you're about to find out why dinner is more of a threat than a comfort. Good luck! It's morning, the sun is up, the church bells are blaring, and you, brave time traveller, are searching for breakfast. Spoiler, breakfast is already searching for an escape route. Your options? A wooden bowl of pottage, a suspiciously thick stew of grains, roots, and a pinch of whatever wasn't eaten by mice last night. If you're lucky, there's a crust of bread so hard you could use it to sand your furniture. Bon appétit. Let's set the scene. You're waking up from your luxurious bug-infested straw mattress, your neck already developing a crick that will last through several centuries. Your bedmates, family, livestock, and a collection of fleas have all survived the night, which means there will be competition for breakfast. You shuffle over the cold dirt floor, wrapped in the same tunic you wore yesterday and the day before that, with the comforting aroma of smoke, sweat, and mild despair lingering in the air. Breakfast is not an event, it's a negotiation. The communal pot is hanging over the remains of the fire, its contents as mysterious as your neighbour's genealogy. This is pottage, the medieval all-purpose meal. It's been cooking for days, sometimes weeks, with fresh ingredients added whenever they appear. If you're lucky, there are a few limp leeks, some barley, maybe a scrap of carrot that somehow survived winter. If you're not, well, you're playing guess that flavour with yesterday's turnip and the faint memory of the onions. You grab your wooden bowl, cracked, stained, and possibly carved by someone who failed woodshop. The ladle emerges from the pot with a gloopy beige mass that could plausibly be described as soup, if you're feeling generous. It makes a dull plop in your bowl. You try not to look too closely. Some days there's a rainbow sheen on top. Is it fat? Is it mould? Who's to say? It all adds to the flavour profile. Now for the pièce de résistance, bread. The medieval peasant's best frenemy. Today's loaf is somewhere between a brick and an artefact. Made from coarse rye or barley flour, wheat is for people with actual money. It's dense, gritty, and has more in common with gravel than gluten. The crust is rock hard. The inside, if you can get to it, is damp and oddly chewy, like someone tried to bake a sponge. If you bite down too quickly, you risk a dental emergency. But you can't afford to be picky. Hunger is a powerful motivator. In the background, the children are arguing over who gets the end piece, which is theoretically softer, but usually just smaller. Grandma is soaking her slice in ale, hoping to avoid another chipped tooth. Speaking of ale, there's a pitcher of small beer on the table. It's weak, barely alcoholic, and vaguely yeasty. But it's safer than the water, which is alive in all the wrong ways. Let's talk about protein. Occasionally, you might find a piece of bacon floating in your pottage. Before you get excited, it's mostly fat, and it's been boiled so many times it's reached a level of translucence previously reserved for ghost stories. More often, there's a rogue bean or two, or maybe a lump of cheese so hard it can be used as a weapon. The morning routine involves scraping your bowl clean, not out of etiquette. but because you need every last calorie. Any leftovers go back into the pot for the next meal. If you drop your bread on the floor, you pick it up, dust it off, and hope it didn't land in the spot where the goat sleeps. As you chew, you glance out the door at the muddy lane, watching your neighbour attempt to coax a chicken into laying an egg. He won't succeed. Eggs are a luxury reserved for holidays, saints' days, or those with suspiciously well-fed chickens. You finish your meal not with satisfaction, but with acceptance. There's no coffee, no fruit, no sweet roll, and absolutely no avocado toast. Just the comfort of knowing you'll face the same meal tomorrow, and every day after that if you're lucky. Congratulations, you've officially survived your first medieval breakfast. Don't worry, it only gets more interesting from here. Lunch arrives, but don't get too excited. Pottage is back, now featuring yesterday's leftovers and maybe a rogue turnip. If you're feeling extra fancy, there's a bit of sour ale to wash it down. No, you can't have seconds. You're not hallucinating from hunger yet. Let's be honest, medieval lunch isn't a highlight of the day. In fact, it's suspiciously similar to breakfast, and will be suspiciously similar to dinner. The trick is to act surprised, as though maybe today the pottage has spontaneously transformed into a roast chicken. Spoiler, it hasn't. The communal pot is once again the centrepiece of the meal, and whatever you ate for breakfast has only gotten older, mushier, and more existentially challenging since then. You take your seat on a wobbly wooden stool, splinters are free, cushions are science fiction, and brace yourself for another encounter with the eternal stew. The pottage is now a little thicker than before, which could be because someone forgot to stir it or because it's evolving. You ladle out a serving, and the contents slither into your bowl. You notice a few new ingredients. Perhaps a cabbage leaf, maybe a piece of gristle, possibly a pebble that joined the party during the morning's foraging. Medieval cooking is always a surprise, and not always a pleasant one. Today, there's the faint hope of variety. A neighbour stopped by to trade half an onion for some wilted greens, so lunch is briefly elevated by the presence of something that still technically counts as a vegetable. Someone even claims there's a sliver of bacon hidden at the bottom of the pot, but this is probably more legend than reality, like the tale of the peasant who once ate cheese on a weekday. Let's talk about side dishes. There aren't any. The closest thing you'll get is a chunk of yesterday's bread, now even harder and chewier than it was this morning. You dunk it into the pottage, hoping to soften it enough to avoid major dental work. If you manage to gnaw through the crust, congratulations, you've earned your medieval merit badge. On the table sits a jug of sour ale, which started as small beer but decided to go off script. You pour yourself a cup, ignoring the mysterious bits floating on top. It's cloudy, smells faintly of feet, and has the unique property of being safer to drink than water, while somehow tasting worse. Still, it takes the edge off the monotony, and may even numb the taste buds enough to make pottage seem tolerable. There's a certain ritual to lunchtime. The family gathers, bowls in hand, and the conversation revolves around three things: how hungry you are, how hungry you were yesterday, and how much hungrier you'll probably be tomorrow. Children are reminded to chew slowly, not for the sake of digestion, but because the longer you chew, the longer lunch seems to last. If you finish first, you get to stare at everyone else's bowls with longing and a touch of quiet resentment. As you eat, you scan the room for scraps. Someone might leave behind an uneaten chunk of turnip, or a sliver of cheese rind if you're truly blessed. You pretend you're full, even as your stomach argues otherwise. There are no seconds. Seconds are a fairy tale told to children to make them believe in a better world, and if you're wondering about dessert, don't. The only sweet thing you'll taste is the memory of the last time someone dropped an apple in the pot by mistake. Lunch ends with a communal scrape of bowls, a collective sigh, and a silent promise to appreciate the next edible surprise life throws your way, no matter how suspicious it looks. With lunch finished, you return to the fields or your chores, fueled by hope, starch, and a shared sense of culinary suffering. One more meal down, 2 to go. Hang in there. The day isn't over, and neither is the pottage. As evening falls, it's time for dinner. You gather with your family around the fire, which is mostly smoke and wishful thinking. Tonight's menu, more stew, and if you're lucky, a rare leathery strip of salted pork that's mostly salt and only sort of pork. Dessert? Imagination. The day's labour is done, or as done as it ever gets, which in the medieval world means you've stopped working only because it's too dark to see your own hand in front of your face. You shuffle back into the house, every joint protesting and your stomach already rumbling with disappointment. In the middle of the hut, the hearth struggles to produce enough warmth to keep you from turning into a peasant-sicle. Still, there's a flicker of excitement because dinner is the highlight of the day by default, not by quality. The pottage pot is back, bubbling quietly in the gloom, filled with the collective dreams and dashed hopes of the household. Every meal has a story, and this one story involves a suspiciously grey turnip and something that might once have been a bean. With a practised hand, you ladle out portions. The stew is a thick, muddy mystery, the colour of regret, and has the consistency of something that's already been chewed. Tonight there's a special treat, a strip of salted pork that's been hiding in the larder for weeks, possibly months. It's so tough you could use it as a shoe in an emergency. As you gnaw on it, the salt dries out your tongue until you can't tell if you're eating food or just reliving your childhood mistakes. There's a faint whiff of actual pork flavour, buried under several layers of preservation and desperation. You chew and chew, hoping you don't lose a tooth. Or worse, bite into something that crunches back. If there's any bread left, it's more weapon than nourishment. A proper slice might break a window, or at the very least your resolve. You dip it in your stew, watching it absorb liquid like a sponge in a medieval mop bucket. It softens up, but not by much. In the candlelight you notice a few moving specks. Are they from the bread, the stew, or just the general atmosphere? Hard to say, and after a long day you're too tired to care. Vegetables, if present, are of the root or bulb variety. Onions, leeks, the ever-present turnip, and maybe a carrot that's seen better centuries. Greens are rare, but a handful of wilted cabbage might float by if it's a feast day. You marvel at the sheer determination it takes to choke down the same meal for the third time today. Culinary monotony is real, and it tastes like muddy turnip stew with a side of nostalgia for last spring's wild garlic. The family eats together in silence, broken only by the sound of slurping and the occasional sigh. You steal glances at your neighbour's bowl, just in case they get distracted and leave something edible behind. It's a subtle art, appearing grateful while secretly strategizing for extra scraps. Someone jokes about dessert, but dessert is mostly a concept, a faint sweet memory of honey or a dried apple from last autumn, long gone and never coming back. Instead, you fill up on water or thin beer, both of which taste faintly of the barrel and sometimes alarmingly of something worse. The last of the stew is scraped from the pot. Any leftovers will become tomorrow's breakfast, continuing the circle of life, or at least the circle of mild disappointment. Dinner ends not with contentment, but with resignation, and a brief, hopeful thought. Maybe tomorrow something new will find its way into the pot. Until then, you drift off to sleep with a belly full of salt, starch, and just enough hope to wake up and do it all again. Let's talk diet. If you thought carb loading was a modern fad, think again. Bread is the backbone of every meal. Thick, dark, gritty loaves made with barley, rye, or whatever could be swept off the mill floor. If you taste something crunchy, don't ask questions. In the Middle Ages, bread is more than just food. It's survival, status, and sometimes a low-key dental threat all in one. Imagine a world where the smell of freshly baked bread doesn't bring comfort, but a sense of mild dread. The reason? The only thing separating your next meal from complete starvation is a sack of coarse grain, and the hope that the miller didn't sweep up too much gravel with your flour. For peasants, white bread is an unattainable dream, a mythical loaf reserved for the tables of lords and wealthy townsfolk. What you get is brown bread, dense, chewy, and loaded with enough fibre to keep your digestive system in a perpetual state of confusion. The colour comes from whole grains, unrefined flours, and whatever else happened to be in the sack when it was ground. Bits of chaff, rogue seeds, maybe even the occasional insect protein. Congratulations, you're accidentally ahead of the modern protein trend. Bread isn't just an accompaniment, it's the plate, the spoon, and on a good day, the napkin. Trencher bread. Thick slabs cut from the middle of a loaf, serves as your dish for stews and pottages. Once you're done, you eat the trencher, now soggy with a day's soup and whatever germs the communal table could offer. Double dipping? That's just lunch. Let's not forget the variety. There's maslin bread, a classic peasant blend of wheat, rye, barley, oats, and creative desperation. Then there's horse bread, made from peas, beans, bran, and, if you believe the rumours, whatever the horse wouldn't eat. It's so tough it was sometimes literally fed to animals, but in the hunger gap before harvest, a stale hunk of horse bread starts to look pretty tempting. Wheat bread, the good stuff, pale and fluffy, is for the rich. It's made from refined flour and eaten by people who can afford to worry about things like tooth decay and gluten sensitivity. For everyone else, the texture of bread is somewhere between a sponge and a pumice stone. Slice it, break it, soak it. Just don't try to bite straight in unless you're looking for an excuse to visit the local barber surgeon. In bad harvest years, bread gets creative. Bakers bulk out the flour with whatever's at hand: beans, peas, acorns, even sawdust and clay. This doesn't do much for the flavour, but it fills the stomach and keeps you just on the right side of starvation. A crunchy bite might mean someone got creative with beet shavings, but as long as it doesn't wriggle, you keep chewing. There's always a risk of St. Anthony's fire, ergot poisoning from fungus-infested rye. Symptoms include hallucinations, convulsions, and a sudden urge to re-evaluate your life choices. It's like an accidental LSD trip, except the only thing you're seeing is your neighbour's equally horrified expression as you both gnaw on the same loaf. Bread is communal, it's baked in shared ovens, bought in markets, traded with neighbours, and divided according to household rank. The best bits go to the adults, the crust to the kids, and the crumbs to the chickens, and possibly later back to you in egg form. It's not just food, it's a daily rationing exercise in social hierarchy. So, next time you sit down to a sandwich, remember, for the medieval peasant, bread wasn't just the staff of life, it was the entire support structure, the flooring, and sometimes the last line of defence between you and actual starvation. If you could taste a hint of rock, well, that's just a little medieval seasoning. Feeling thirsty? Too bad. Water isn't your friend, it's a medieval death trap. Rivers are open sewers, wells are full of flavour, and everyone drinks weak beer instead. Even kids. Cheers to not dying of dysentery before lunch, and let's set the scene. You stumble out of bed, parched from a night of communal snoring and inhaling more smoke than actual air, and what do you crave? A cold, refreshing glass of water. That's cute. Because in the Middle Ages, reaching for the nearest cup of water is about as safe as playing hopscotch in a minefield. There's a reason nobody brags about 8 glasses a day. If you managed even one without immediate intestinal regret, you were living dangerously. Your main options for hydration are threefold: the village well, the nearest river or stream, or the rain barrel outside the door. Let's break them down. The well is communal, which means everyone's using it for everything. Drinking, washing, and occasionally disposing of things better left unmentioned. Sure, the water looks clear, but if it tastes like last week's fish stew, that's just added minerals. And don't get too excited about the rope and bucket system. It's only a matter of time before a frog or a suspiciously heavy accident turns your well into a cauldron of surprises. Then there's the river. Picturesque, yes. Safe? Not even close. Medieval rivers double as laundromats, sewers, garbage dumps, and sometimes social gathering places for ducks with very questionable hygiene. Upstream, a neighbour might be washing their laundry, while just out of view, someone else is dumping last night's chamber pot. Drinking straight from the river is a surefire way to get acquainted with the entire spectrum of medieval parasites and a few bonus diseases modern medicine hasn't bothered to name. The rain barrel sounds promising, until you realise it's also home to a thriving community of algae, mosquito larvae, and the occasional drowned rodent. The barrel leaks, the lid doesn't fit, and every rainfall is just another invitation for birds to add seasoning. Some families get creative, boiling water, filtering it through cloth, or adding a handful of herbs for flavour and hopefully survival. But most days you just hold your breath, squint at the cup, and take your chances. That's why beer becomes the beverage of choice, even for children. But before you picture medieval kids doing keg stands or lords chugging pints at breakfast, let's clarify. We're talking about small beer. This is not craft brew or festival ale. It's weak, barely alcoholic, and brewed primarily for the purpose of killing off whatever nightmares lived in the water. It's cloudy, warm, and has the mouthfeel of watery oatmeal, but it won't put you in an early grave, at least not as quickly as the water will. Wine is another option, but only if you're wealthy or live in a wine-growing region. Most peasants see wine about as often as they see clean socks. For special occasions, maybe you'll get a sip. If you're related to the village priest or have just survived a plague, otherwise it's beer or bust. Let's talk consequences. Waterborne illnesses are so common they don't even get special names. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera, these are just summer complaints or the runs. If you start feeling queasy after a big drink, there's a good chance you'll be visiting the bucket behind the house for the next week. Dehydration is a constant companion, and the phrase, "don't drink the water," isn't a suggestion, it's a survival rule. So next time you grumble about the taste of tap water or roll your eyes at someone offering you bottled, just remember, in the Middle Ages, water was less a thirst quencher and more a medieval lottery ticket. Every sip was a gamble, and the house always wins. Small beer, not a craft brew but the only safe thing to drink. With less alcohol than cough syrup and more floaties than you want to know about, this stuff keeps you alive. Barely. Think of it as Gatorade for the desperate. Let's set the scene. You wake up in your medieval hovel, parched from a night spent breathing in equal parts smoke, dust, and your cousin's questionable bedtime stories. You stumble to the table, eyeing the murky pitcher sitting next to the bread that's already plotting dental sabotage. This, dear time traveller, is small beer, your morning hydration, and your best chance at not dying before sunset. Small beer is not what modern hipsters dream of. No fruity notes, no amber glow, and certainly no pretentious descriptions about mouthfeel. It's beer's awkward, watery cousin, brewed for speed and survival, not flavour. The main selling point? It's been boiled, which means the water in it is, statistically, less likely to take revenge on your intestines. The alcohol content is so low it won't get a mouse drunk, but it's just enough to outmuscle the local bacteria. The taste? Imagine weak tea, left out in the rain, filtered through old straw with a hint of, what's that? It's slightly sour, always cloudy, and sometimes carries a layer of mysterious sediment at the bottom of your mug. You learn early on not to question the sediment, just don't look at it too closely. If you swirl the cup before drinking, you're living dangerously. Why not just drink water, you ask? Well, we covered that. Medieval water is a roulette wheel of misery. The local well has the same hygiene standards as a barnyard, and the river is upstream from everyone else's bathroom. So beer becomes your lifeline. Even the kids drink it. There's no age limit for survival after all. Breakfast in medieval times means starting your day with a beverage that's part science project, part necessary evil. Brewing small beer is a home industry. Every household has a different recipe, passed down from generations who all agreed on one thing. The water is trying to kill you. Grains, usually barley, sometimes oats or whatever's left in the bin, are boiled, mashed, fermented, and then watered down until the finished product is less intoxicating than a stern look from your grandmother. Hops might be used, but often it's just herbs, old bread, and a little bit of hope. You drink it from rough wooden mugs, clay cups, or whatever you have on hand. Sometimes in larger villages, communal breweries exist, and everyone brings a bucket to fill up. The flavour profile, let's just say consistency, is not the medieval strong suit. One day it tastes like vinegar, the next day like weak oatmeal. If it fizzes, you count yourself lucky. At least it's fresh. Small beer isn't just for breakfast, it's for lunch, dinner, and every moment in between. Thirsty from working the fields? Small beer. Hot day in the market? Small beer. Can't sleep at night because you're haunted by the existential dread of famine and plague? You guessed it. Small beer. The health benefits are relative. The calories help when the food runs out, and you can at least pretend you're hydrating. If you drink enough, you might just forget about the taste. On rare, festive occasions, someone breaks out real beer. Stronger, richer, possibly actually enjoyable. For most, though, it's small beer, all day, every day. So next time you sip your fancy sparkling water or worry about whether your almond milk is organic, spare a thought for the medieval peasant raising a lukewarm mug of murky beer to the rising sun, thankful for one more day not spent hugging a chamber pot. Cheers and bottoms up. Let's be clear, if you're poor, meat's a rumour. Maybe, just maybe, you get a scrap of bacon once a year. The rest of the time, you're staring wistfully at a neighbour's chicken and hoping for a miracle, or a very slow chicken. In the medieval world, meat is the edible equivalent of a winning lottery ticket. Rare, mythical, and almost never found in the wild or on your plate. When you imagine a medieval feast, you're probably picturing overflowing tables, roasted animals, and some guy in a hat playing a lute while everyone stuffs their faces. That's true, if you're a noble. For you, humble peasant, the reality is a daily parade of turnips, beans, and pottage, while your only interaction with pork is hearing about it during Mass. Meat is so rare in your diet, it basically has folklore status. There are stories about families that caught a rabbit or managed to find a wild bird in the woods. Translation: poached from the Lord's estate and prayed nobody saw them. The penalty for getting caught poaching? It's not a slap on the wrist. You could lose a hand, be fined more than your entire annual income, or, in the most dramatic cases, wind up a cautionary tale yourself. All this risk for what amounts to 3 mouthfuls of tough stringy game, if you're lucky. Your one legal hope is the annual pig slaughter, a major village event that's half festival, half survival ritual. If you're part of a family that owns a pig, you might get a piece. Most of the meat is salted, smoked, and hidden away to last through the winter. The fresh part you get to taste, maybe a sliver of jowl, a bit of liver, or a slice of bacon so thin it's basically an edible memory. On very special occasions, weddings, funerals, or if someone miraculously reaches old age, someone might produce a sausage that's 90% breadcrumbs, 10% questionable mystery meat. The rest of the time, you're making do with what you have. Soup bones get reused until they're polished smooth. Boiling a bone for hours is as much about extracting wishful flavour as it is nutrition. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to gnaw on a bit of dried fish, probably salted into oblivion and shipped from somewhere that may or may not exist. The taste. Imagine licking an old boot that was left on the beach for a month. Chickens are precious, but not for their meat, at least not usually. If you're raising chickens, you want the eggs, not the drumsticks. The idea of killing your only hen for one meal is like selling your bicycle for gas money. Short-term win, long-term disaster. Chickens that stop laying are the only ones that end up in the pot, and by then, they're so tough you might as well be boiling a medieval shoe. The gap between rich and poor is especially obvious at the table. Nobles feast on roast venison, capons, and entire swans, their leftovers sometimes trickling down to their servants, and, if you're lucky, the village. You, meanwhile, are building muscles in your jaw trying to chew a bit of pork fat that survived 2 months in a salt barrel. You watch the Lord's table from a distance, wondering what roast beef actually tastes like and trying not to drool too openly. So, for most of the year, you make do with beans, lentils, and if the stars align, a few spoonfuls of lard stirred into pottage for flavour. You might dream about sausages, imagine bacon, and reminisce about that one time you tasted mutton at a wedding. Meat is a fantasy, one you'll keep chasing even if it stays just out of reach, somewhere between hope and hunger. Sure, nobles eat roast swan and spice cakes. You, however, are picking wild greens and chewing on last year's apples. Social mobility. Only if you count the worms in your fruit. Let's take a moment to look up at the manor house perched smugly on the hill. Inside, the lord and lady are enjoying a banquet. Roasted meats, spiced wine, platters of fish, buttery pastries, and, most infuriating of all, a bowl of fresh fruit gleaming like forbidden treasure. Meanwhile, you're crouched in a muddy ditch, foraging for dandelion leaves and wild sorrel. Dinner for the nobility is a pageant of luxury. Dinner for you is a scavenger hunt with slightly more chewing. Fruit is a perfect example of the great culinary divide. The Lord's orchard is bursting with pears, apples, plums and cherries, each tree heavy with potential. You're allowed to look but not to touch. Picking fruit from the Lord's trees, or worse, from his personal kitchen garden, is an offence that can get you fined, beaten, or even worse, forced to work off your debt in some truly unpleasant ways. You're left to scavenge in the hedgerows, searching for whatever fruit survived last season, or wasn't already picked clean by birds, children, or actual desperate adults. The only apples you see regularly are the ones shrivelling in your loft since last autumn. They're more brown than red, and so soft you can spread them on bread, assuming you're in the mood for bread with a hint of mystery mush and at least 2 kinds of worm. Wild berries, if you find them, are a treat. Sour, gritty, and suspiciously crunchy. Did you just bite a seed or a bug? You don't ask, you just keep eating. Now, let's talk about greens. Wild garlic, nettles, chickweed, and anything that can be yanked up and boiled into submission goes into your pottage. Spinach, kale, those are the dreams of the Italian elite. You're boiling dandelion leaves and praying no one else picked the same patch. If you're really lucky, you might stumble upon wild mushrooms, though you better hope you know the difference between delicious and fatal. Medieval foraging is always a high-stakes game. Meanwhile, the noble's kitchen is a whirlwind of flavours and possibilities. Their cooks, yes, plural, prepare pies filled with sweetened quinces, grapes soaked in honey, and cakes spiced with cinnamon, nutmeg and ginger. Spices so expensive they're literally locked away. These ingredients are brought in at great cost from foreign lands, which explains why the Lord's sweet tooth can bankrupt a small village. Spices, sugar and fancy fruits don't just make food taste better for the rich, they're a status symbol. Serving oranges in December or almonds in February means you've made it in life, or at least that you've made someone else pay for your expensive tastes. You, on the other hand, are lucky to get a sprinkle of chives. Your greatest luxury is maybe a wild plum that escaped both birds and the neighbour's kids. The closest you get to a spice cake is rye bread dusted with the ashes from the fire. As for dessert, you make do with whatever you can find. Sometimes, this means stewing crab apples with a little honey if you somehow have both. More often, it means chewing on a stalk of rhubarb and pretending you're at a royal feast. Fantasy fills your stomach more than actual food. So, as you gnaw on a wormy apple and daydream about pears, remember, the noble diet is another world entirely, guarded by walls, laws, and the crushing certainty that you'll never be invited to the feast. Social mobility is a myth. Your reality is gritty, green, and just a little bit sour. But hey, at least the view of the manor is free, if you squint past the nettles. Here's a fun twist. Sometimes your bread isn't just bad, it's hallucinogenic. Thanks to ergot, a fungus that infects rye, one meal could turn into a psychedelic nightmare, seizures included. Who needs Netflix? Let's rewind to the heart of medieval grain storage, where rye, one of the only crops hardy enough to survive medieval weather, sits in dark, damp corners just waiting for something horrible to happen. Enter ergot, a fungus with an appetite for the same bread you're trying to choke down for dinner. Ergot is easy to miss, at least until your loaf sprouts little black grains that look just a bit off, but honestly, at this point, who can even tell? Your bread already comes in a rainbow of brown, grey and mystery. You've survived a bad harvest, made it through the hunger gap, and finally you have a decent hunk of bread in hand. You're so hungry you barely notice the funky taste or the strange crunch. But this isn't just an ordinary loaf, it's laced with the medieval world answer to LSD. Ergot poisoning, or St. Anthony's fire, doesn't just give you stomach pain. It can bring convulsions, hallucinations, gangrene, and the kind of nightmarish visions that would get you burned as a witch if you described them out loud. It all starts innocently enough. Maybe you're eating at breakfast, maybe lunch, maybe dinner, because bread is the main event, not the side dish. The first bite is gritty, the second a little bitter. By the third you might not care because you're suddenly having a heart-to-heart with the fireplace, or trying to swat imaginary bugs out of your hair. You look across the table at your family and half of them are staring into space, eyes wide, mumbling about angels, demons, or just how the walls seem to be breathing. The other half are already doubled over in pain. It's not just a family problem. Entire villages can be struck by ergot at once, usually after a wet summer, when the harvest gets mouldy before anyone can dry it out. Suddenly, your sleepy little hamlet is a medieval horror show. People convulsing in the street, children terrified of their own shadows, and the local priest chalking it all up to demons, curses, or, if he's feeling scientific, bad humours. In the absence of medical knowledge, everyone blames sin, witches, or the neighbour who always looked at you funny. If you're one of the unlucky ones who gets the severe version, the poison causes blood vessels to constrict. Limbs blacken and rot away. You lose fingers, toes, or entire hands, assuming you don't lose your mind first. All this from a slice of bread that tasted only slightly stranger than usual. The scary part? No one really knows what's happening. There's no germ theory, no concept of mould, just a lot of frantic prayers and makeshift cures that mostly involve herbs, bleeding, or, if you're lucky, getting shipped off to a distant monastery to ride out your fever dreams in peace. If you recover, it's a miracle. If you don't, well, the village just hopes the bread will be better next year. Yet people keep eating rye because there aren't other options. Starvation is always looming, and as dangerous as ergot might be, an empty stomach is a more immediate threat. Every meal becomes a gamble. Will you fill your belly or spend the night talking to invisible saints and watching your feet turn blue? So, next time you enjoy a sandwich, be grateful your bread isn't trying to kill you, or at least take you on an unwanted spiritual journey. In medieval times, dinner and danger go hand in hand, and a loaf of rye could deliver more drama than the entire streaming catalogue. At least the hallucinations are free, unlike everything else in your life. When the harvest fails, bread becomes experimental. Sawdust, ground beans, even clay gets added to bulk it up. It fills your stomach, but it's about as nourishing as eating a small chair. Let's talk about the worst case scenario, a bad year. The rain didn't fall, the sun didn't shine, or locusts did that thing locusts love to do. Suddenly, you're staring at a winter with barely enough grain to last through the first snowfall. In a world with no supermarkets and no secret pantry of emergency Pop-Tarts, you get creative, or, more accurately, desperate. First up, the medieval answer to stretching the grocery budget, filler. Anything that can be ground, pounded, or scraped off a reasonably clean surface becomes fair game. Sawdust? Why not? It's abundant, it's fibrous, and when mixed with rye flour and baked over a smoky fire, it adds a texture reminiscent of a sanding block. The trick is to add just enough that it doesn't splinter on the way down. If you're feeling fancy, you might sift it first. Then there's clay. Yes, actual clay. The stuff that, in modern times, you'd use for pottery or face masks is pressed into service as a bread ingredient. Clay helps give bread a little bulk and an impressive chewiness. Some believed it binds the stomach, which is medieval code for makes you feel too full to complain. You hope it's the good clean clay and not the kind the pigs rolled in last summer. Beans and peas get called up to the starting lineup too. You dry them, grind them, and mix them with the precious few handfuls of grain you have left. The result is a dense, heavy loaf that's technically edible. In a good year, this kind of bread is called maslin, a blend of whatever's at hand. In a bad year, it's just called survival. The flavour, earthy. The aftertaste, regret. Anything starchy gets a shot. Old chestnuts, acorns, even parsnips, boiled until soft, mashed, and worked into the dough. Some clever souls try to leach the bitterness from acorns, but there's always the risk of missing a step and turning bread into a medieval dare. Sometimes even weeds make the cut. Plantain seeds, dandelion roots, whatever the sheep didn't want. Let's not forget the texture. Creative bread is hard, harder than a brick, harder than your neighbour's heart. Cutting it is a two-hand job, and biting into it is an exercise in optimism. You'll soak it in ale or soup, hoping to soften it enough to swallow without injuring yourself. If it crumbles, you gather the pieces and throw them into tomorrow's pottage. Waste not, want not. And the colour? A proper creative bread isn't a warm golden brown. It's streaked with grey, dotted with green flecks, and sometimes sparkles if the local sand got into the mix. In the right light, it's almost artistic. In the wrong light, it looks like you're about to eat a medieval building material. Occasionally there's a faint taste of smoke from the fire, or, if you're lucky, a hint of last year's onion crop. The main point isn't taste, nutrition, or even safety. It's survival. You eat to keep the hunger away, not because you're savouring the flavour. You imagine nobles debating the perfect sauce for roast swan, while you're perfecting the art of swallowing without chewing. Your teeth will hate you, your stomach will grumble in confusion, but you'll live to see another turnip season. So next time you complain about bland toast or whole grain bread, remember, in a bad medieval year, bread wasn't just food. It was proof of your creativity, your desperation, and your willingness to eat anything that wasn't nailed down. And sometimes you even considered the nails. Vegetables are not your friends, but they are your constant companions. Turnips, onions, leeks, and wild herbs form the backbone of your diet. You will never want to see another turnip again. Let's be honest, in medieval times the term vegetable medley meant which roots haven't we eaten yet this week. The relentless parade of root vegetables is your daily fate. The superstar of the medieval produce aisle is the humble turnip, easy to grow, hard to love, and absolutely impossible to escape. If you ever wondered how many ways there are to boil, mash, stew, or just gnaw on a turnip, you're about to find out. Spoiler: there aren't that many, but you'll try them all. Onions and leeks are the main supporting cast, adding a hint of flavour to the otherwise grey and beige scenery of your meals. If you're lucky enough to have a patch of ground that isn't currently hosting a family of moles, you plant onions and hope for the best. When harvest time comes, you dry them carefully and string them up in the rafters, where they double as food and rustic home decor. Leeks grow anywhere there's mud and apathy, and make their way into every pot and pottage, offering the 1-2 punch of flavour and digestive side effects. On a cold morning, you'll be grateful for both. Beyond the cultivated beds, the true medieval superfoods are weeds: chickweed, nettles, sorrel, wild garlic, dandelion greens. Anything green and vaguely edible goes in the pot. If you're a peasant, you know every hedgerow for miles and exactly which weeds are safe to eat, which taste like regret, and which will send you to meet your ancestors early. Medieval life is one long, desperate audition for the next foraging reality show. Occasionally you hit the jackpot and find wild mushrooms. This is a high-risk, high-reward scenario. The edible ones are delicious and transform your humble pottage into something almost memorable. The inedible ones turn dinner into a psychedelic trip or an urgent call for the village priest. If you're not sure, you ask the oldest person in the village, who will squint at the mushroom and say, "Well, it never killed me, but then again, I'm still here." That's as close to medical advice as you're going to get. let's not ignore the flavour experience. Medieval vegetables have a reputation, and it's well earned. Most are stringy, bitter, or bland, sometimes all at once. Boiled cabbage and wilted spinach are luxuries compared to the never-ending march of turnip-based cuisine. Everything gets boiled, if only to soften the texture and make sure you're not swallowing any uninvited wildlife. The house fills with the earthy aroma of cooking greens, occasionally interrupted by the sharp bite of wild garlic, or the uniquely medieval scent of overcooked rutabaga. In good years, you might see a carrot or a parsnip, sweet, colourful, and gone in an instant. In bad years, you're back to roots and leaves, mixing whatever you can find to keep your pottage from becoming a beige existential crisis. Tomatoes, potatoes, and corn are centuries away, living their best lives in the Americas, completely unaware of the suffering going on across the Atlantic. If only you could taste a tomato, just once. Despite the monotony, vegetables are what stand between you and starvation. You learn to appreciate the first green shoots of spring, the bitter taste of wild cress, the chewy resilience of dock leaves. You never truly love them, but you depend on them, just like you depend on the turnip, which will haunt your dreams for the rest of your life. So, next time you push your kale to the side or glare at your salad, remember, for a medieval peasant, every leaf and root was precious. Not delicious, not glamorous, but essential. And above all, relentless. No refrigeration means every meal is a gamble. Cheese is mostly mould, milk is already trying to be cheese, and meat is only fresh if you saw it walk into the house this morning. Let's be clear. The concept of freshness in medieval times is best described as optimistic. You, the average peasant, are locked in an eternal battle with spoilage. In the absence of refrigerators, freezers, or even ice, time is your enemy, and your dinner is always one step ahead of you, headed in the wrong direction. Start with milk. It's delivered straight from the goat, sheep or cow, usually into a wooden bucket that smells like every animal that's ever used it. You drink it fast, if you're brave, or let it sit until it thickens, sours, and becomes what passes for cheese. Milk doesn't wait for anyone. Blink, and it's gone from creamy to don't ask, just strain it. Cheese is another story. A daily staple, but also a Russian roulette of flavour, texture and penicillin. Most cheese is aged in the same sense that a forgotten sock behind the stove is aged. You scrape off the green bits, slice off the blue, and call whatever remains edible. If it crumbles when you cut it, it's ready. If it squelches, you pretend it's supposed to. Now let's talk about meat. If you're eating it, it means either a big event just happened, wedding, festival, or unfortunate accident involving a chicken and a fence, or you've made a very expensive decision. Fresh meat is a fleeting miracle. You want to eat it as soon as it stops moving before it attracts every fly in the county and develops its own fan club of mysterious smells. The phrase aged beef in medieval Europe just means forgotten beef. More often, meat is preserved in salt, hung up in the smoky rafters, or packed in barrels so tightly it becomes unrecognisable. If you get a piece, you boil it for hours to soften it and to encourage whatever's living on it to evacuate. The vegetables? Well, we've covered the relentless turnip, but it's worth mentioning that even your carrots, leeks and onions have a best before date measured in hours. Root sellers slow the inevitable, but after a few months, the only thing more wrinkled than the potatoes is the village elder. Any greenery not pickled, salted, or buried in sand will wilt, rot, or disappear into the ether, sometimes all at once. Every meal is a chemistry experiment with only two outcomes, sustenance or suffering. Let's not forget bread. In a good year it's stale, in a bad year it's a breeding ground for ergot, mould, and the occasional surprise crunch. Medieval bakers do their best, but flour stored in damp corners inevitably develops character. If the colour seems a little off or it smells a bit funky, you just dunk it in your soup and hope for the best. Texture is optional. Survival is not. Preserved foods come with their own set of problems. Salted fish tastes less like fish and more like ocean-flavoured wood. Smoked meats are sometimes so smoky you're basically eating firewood. Pickled vegetables are sharp, sour, and sometimes suspiciously fizzy. But all of this is preferable to eating something fresh that's been sitting out all day in the summer sun, covered with a cloth as effective as a screen door on a submarine. Hunger makes you brave, so you eat what you can, and learn to ignore the odd flavour, strange colour, or alarming texture. You tell yourself that blue cheese is a delicacy, and that a bit of fuzz is proof of natural ageing. So the next time you wince at leftovers or sniff the milk carton, remember that for the medieval peasant, every meal was an act of courage and a small victory against the forces of mould, rot, and questionable cheese. There are good weeks, when beans and peas are fresh, and then there's the long grey hunger gap between harvests when you eat whatever you can find, or you don't eat at all. Imagine a world without supermarkets, canned goods, or farm-to-table anything. In medieval times, your menu is written by the weather and whatever you managed to store in the attic last autumn. For a few shining weeks in the summer, life is almost delicious. The garden explodes with peas, beans, cabbages, and all the green things you secretly wish were bread. The pot simmers with fresh flavours, and you almost forget what it's like to chew on last year's turnip. Children run wild with berry-stained hands and sticky faces. Even the chickens seem happier. But as quickly as it comes, the harvest season passes. You try to stretch the bounty by drying beans, salting greens, and stuffing every nook with withering onions. Potatoes and corn are centuries away, so you're left to build your winter stockpile from a mountain of cabbage, a stack of parsnips, and the vague hope that your storage pit won't flood or freeze. There's never enough. By midwinter, the carrots look like shrunken goblins, and the apples are so soft you can spread them on bread, assuming you have any bread left. Then the hunger gap arrives. It's that bleak stretch between the last of the old crops and the first new shoots. Late winter into early spring, a time so legendary for misery it deserves its own villainous soundtrack. The food in your cellar has gone from wilted to maybe alive, and each meal becomes a negotiation with fate. You dig through the root pile hoping to find something that hasn't sprouted, rotted, or been claimed by mice. Spoiler, the mice are winning. Your diet shrinks with each passing day. Dinner becomes a handful of limp cabbage, a spoonful of sour beans, and whatever you foraged from the hedgerow. Nettles, dock leaves, chickweed. Anything green that isn't immediately fatal is on the menu. Some families get creative, boiling bark, soaking acorns, or grating the last of the dried peas into a gritty mush. If you're very lucky, a neighbour will share a scrap of bacon or a precious egg, but most nights you just dream about eggs and wake up chewing on your own tongue. It's not just the body that suffers. Morale takes a nosedive. You find yourself daydreaming about last summer's meals when the pot was full and the bread didn't fight back. Children ask when the strawberries will return, and you lie through your teeth. Adults grow quiet, tempers run short, and everything smells vaguely of desperation and old onion. Community matters now more than ever. Neighbours might pool resources, trade a bit of last year's honey for a bunch of wilted leeks, or gather for a communal meal so at least everyone is equally miserable. The church sometimes doles out alms, thin porridge, hard cheese, or, on rare feast days, an extra loaf. Still, nothing fills the void left by a truly empty larder. Then, just when you think you can't stand another meal of boiled nothing, you see the first shoots of green pushing through the thawing mud. Spring arrives like a miracle. Wild herbs, sorrel, and baby leeks become the new currency of hope. The chickens start laying again, the cows produce richer milk, and the world finally feels edible. So next time you're stuck between shopping trips staring at your empty fridge, remember that for a medieval peasant, the hunger gap was more than an inconvenience. It was a test of patience, ingenuity, and just how many ways you can cook a cabbage before you go mad. And if you survived until the next harvest, you were luckier, and probably hungrier, than most. Salt is more valuable than gold, used to preserve what little food you have. If you're lucky, you get a pinch on your turnips. If you're not, you just pretend. Let's put things in perspective. In medieval times, nobody dreams of gold bars or treasure chests. The real jackpot, A handful of salt is the difference between surviving winter and, well, not. This isn't the modern shaker on every table. This is rare, expensive, and depending on where you live, almost mythical. Salt isn't just a seasoning, it's a lifeline, a currency, and the closest thing you'll ever see to magic powder. If you live near the coast or a salty spring, you're one of the lucky few who might actually see real salt more than once a year. For everyone else, salt is imported, taxed, hoarded, and traded like medieval Bitcoin. Your lord controls the supply, and you're at the end of a long line of people all hoping to get their share. You might be able to buy a little in the market, if you have anything worth trading and if the merchant doesn't take one look at your boots and decide you're just browsing. Why is salt such a big deal? It's the only reliable way to preserve food before the world invented refrigeration canning or that stuff in Lunchables. Salted pork, salted fish, salted everything. If it isn't covered in salt, it's covered in mould or flies. Your annual pig slaughter festival. Every usable scrap is packed in barrels with as much salt as you can spare, because fresh meat is a race against decay, and frankly, you're losing. But salt isn't cheap. Sometimes you make do with salted food that's just sort of salty, or you use the dregs left at the bottom of a barrel and hope it still has some flavour left. On regular days, a turnip with a pinch of salt feels like a banquet. On lean days, you just pretend, telling yourself you've grown accustomed to the natural flavours of root vegetables, which is medieval for lying to yourself for survival. The value of salt goes beyond food. It's an official currency. Medieval workers, soldiers, and even monks are sometimes paid in salt, hence the word salary. If you're given a handful, you might stash it away, trade it for something rare, or guard it like a dragon. Drop your salt on the floor and you don't just sweep it up. You say a prayer, rescue every grain, and try not to cry in front of your family. Salt is also a social status symbol. The nobility and wealthy townsfolk keep salt in locked boxes on the table, doling it out with a tiny spoon like they're dealing with powdered diamonds. To be above the salt is to sit at the privileged end of the table, closest to the Lord and his precious supply. You, on the other hand, are down at the far end, hoping for a whiff of it, and maybe, just maybe, a stray pinch. Salt even finds its way into medicine. Sprained ankle, rub salt on it. Sore throat, gargle with salt water. Evil spirits in the house, sprinkle salt in the corners, though if you do, your mother will have a few words about wasting it. Of course, all this precious salt has to come from somewhere. Salt mining is dangerous, grueling work, hot, cramped, and occasionally fatal. The medieval salt works along the coast are bleak and windy places, where whole communities labour just to scrape a living from the brine. Inland, you might be reduced to boiling down salty springs or buying lumps of impure rock salt that needs to be pounded and cleaned before it's edible. So next time you idly scatter sea salt over your fries, spare a thought for your medieval self. For you, salt is gold dust, a miracle that keeps food from killing you, and a luxury you may never take for granted again. Think all medieval meals are huge feasts. Think again. The real feasts are rare and you're not invited. Instead, you hear about them from your lord's cousin's neighbour while gnawing on your bread brick. Let's get something straight. The vast tables groaning under roasted boars, towers of pastries and endless jugs of wine. That's not your life. That's a story told by minstrels who are probably too tipsy to remember the details anyway. For the average medieval peasant, the only time you get close to a feast is when you peek through the manor's windows, if you're not chased away by the kitchen staff first. The rest of the year, your menu is a rotation of turnips, pottage, and fantasies about cheese. Real feasts do happen, of course. Weddings, saints' days, major holidays, or when someone finally gets around to being crowned or buried. These are the rare moments when the entire village buzzes with the possibility of a proper meal. The Lord's Hall is swept, banners are hung, and the kitchen erupts into chaos. Pigs are slaughtered, fish are hauled in from the market, barrels of ale are cracked open, and a suspicious number of geese suddenly go missing. If you're part of the staff, you might get the honour of peeling onions until you cry, plucking chickens until you lose feeling in your fingers, and then cleaning up until you question your life choices. If you're lucky, and I mean miracle level lucky, you might be invited to stand at the back somewhere between the musicians and the village priest, hoping someone forgets their trenchers. Otherwise, your role is to help set up, sneak a glance, and then eat the leftovers, if there are any. Sometimes the leftovers are just the bones, picked clean and boiled for one last desperate soup. On rare occasions, the Lord might throw a bone to the peasants, literally. There are stories of feasts where villagers scramble for scraps tossed out a window, turning the manor's lawn into a medieval food fight. So what happens inside where the real action is? Picture a crowded, smoky hall packed with the region's elite and a handful of nervous servants. The tables groan under mountains of roasted meats. Pork, beef, venison, birds that you can't even identify without a field guide. There are pies stuffed with everything from fish to fruit, and puddings so rich they should come with a warning. Jugs of wine and ale slosh across the tables, and there's so much noise that the minstrels might as well be playing for the sheep outside. But even at a noble feast, not all is glamorous. Table manners are optional. People eat with their hands, tear hunks of bread to mop up gravy, and toss the bones on the floor for the dogs, or unlucky servants. Conversation is loud, messy, and occasionally interrupted by the odd brawl, sudden announcement, or someone fainting into the pudding. The air is thick with smoke, grease, and the underlying scent of too many people in not enough space. For you, the feast is a distant dream. You hear about it the next day. Did you see the swan stuffed with figs? Did you try the almond cream? You nod and smile, then go home to your bowl of boiled weeds and start planning how you'll trade next week's eggs for a slice of actual meat. Every now and then, the village gets to celebrate a communal feast, a church holiday or a wedding, where the tables overflow with, well, slightly less turnip-heavy fare. There might be sweet buns, a hint of honey, or a stew that actually tastes like stew. For one shining moment, everyone eats like a king, and then it's back to reality, with your pottage, your brick bread, and the story you'll tell about the time you got a bite of roast goose. So the next time you picture a medieval feast, remember, unless you're the one wearing a velvet hat and holding a goblet, you're probably not on the guest list. For everyone else, the great feast is a myth, one you taste only in your dreams, and maybe, if you're really lucky, in a single glorious leftover bone. Hunger isn't an inconvenience, it's a background character in your life. Failed harvest? Get ready for famine. There are no supermarkets. There isn't even a backup plan. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how precarious your medieval existence really is. In a world where the closest thing to a safety net is your neighbour's empty pantry, you're always just one bad season away from trouble. A late frost wipes out the barley. Rain won't stop, so the beans rot in the ground. Or maybe there's no rain at all, and you spend every morning peering hopefully at the sky, hoping for clouds that don't look like the inside of a bread oven. Bad luck. That's not a rare event. It's the most dependable part of the weather forecast. Famine isn't something that just happens somewhere else. It's woven into the rhythm of life. One year you're scraping by, the next you're scraping the bottom of the barrel and still coming up empty. Every peasant knows the warning signs: smaller loaves in the market, watery pottage at dinner, more folks out in the fields hunting for wild greens. You swap stories about the last hungry year, when everyone ate nothing but thin broth and hope, and you brace yourself for the next round. When food runs out, everything changes. The rhythm of the village slows, and so does the laughter. Kids get quieter. Even the animals sense the tension, clinging to scraps of hay like they know what's coming. The elderly remember what it's like to go to bed hungry for weeks on end, and the young learn it the hard way. Some families pool what little they have, stretching each meal thinner and thinner until it's more ritual than sustenance. Desperation makes you creative. Anything remotely edible is fair game. You dig up roots, boil weeds, and maybe gnaw on strips of dried bark. The old stories about eating shoe leather aren't jokes, they're survival strategies. People trade whatever they can. An extra egg for a handful of beans, a loaf of bread for a promise, even though everyone knows promises don't taste like much. When a neighbour shares their last carrot, you don't forget it, and you hope you'll get a chance to repay the kindness, if anyone's left to do the repaying. Disease loves famine almost as much as famine loves rain. Weak bodies get sick faster. Colds linger for months, turning into something more dangerous. Wounds don't heal. Even the village healer is running low on dried herbs and cheerful lies. If there's an epidemic, plague, fever, or just a bad batch of spoiled food, it sweeps through quickly, leaving fewer mouths at the dinner table and more empty bowls. Meanwhile, the Lord's granaries aren't as empty as yours. If you're lucky, he'll throw open the storehouse doors and distribute grain. After he's taken his cut, of course. If not, you watch as ox carts full of food roll past on their way to market, and you dream about being the sort of person who can buy enough bread to actually go stale. Charity from the church helps, but even the priest can't feed everyone. Hunger is always there. It's a background hum in your belly, a whisper in your ear, a reminder that everything can change overnight. You plan your day around calories. Should you eat now or save it for later? Will tomorrow be better, or will you have even less? When the hunger finally passes, if it passes, you remember the feeling for the rest of your life. You measure every future meal against it. So next time you're stuck in traffic on the way to the grocery store, or you grumble about leftovers, remember your medieval self, always hungry, always hustling, and always, somehow, surviving. Starvation isn't an event, it's the shadow that follows you every single day. Desperate. Try hunting a rabbit on the Lord's land. If you're caught, you might lose a hand, or your head. Dinner and danger have never been so closely linked. In the medieval world, almost everything belongs to someone richer than you. Especially the things you need most, like food. The woods beyond your village are full of temptation. Wild rabbits, fat pheasants, maybe even a deer if you're feeling lucky and have a death wish. But those creatures aren't just wild. They're the Lord's property, protected by laws with punishments designed to make sure you never get any bright ideas about roast venison. The rules are simple. If it walks, flies, or hops on the Lord's land, it's his dinner, not yours. And that patch of forest you stare at every morning on your way to the fields, it's off limits, patrolled by gamekeepers whose job description is equal parts security guard, spy, and overzealous tattletale. These guys know every trail, every rabbit run, and every excuse in the book. They catch you sneaking around with a bow or even a suspicious-looking stick, and you're in deep trouble. But hunger changes the rules. When winter drags on and the pottage gets thinner, the idea of a rabbit stew grows stronger than your fear of consequences. You wait until night falls. With your heart pounding and stomach growling, you slip into the trees, eyes wide for both prey and patrollers. The silence is broken only by your own breathing, and every snapped twig sounds like a drum roll for your doom. If you're lucky, you catch something small, a rabbit, maybe a squirrel or a handful of birds' eggs. If you're really lucky, you get away unseen. The meal you bring home is a feast shared quickly, bones and all, in the privacy of your smoky hut. You eat fast because every bite is stolen, and every shadow at the door is a possible end to your brief culinary joy. But luck runs out eventually. The penalties for poaching are legendary, and terrifyingly real. At best, you pay a hefty fine that leaves your family hungry for months. At worst, you're looking at the loss of a hand, branding, imprisonment, or, for repeat offenders or big game hunters, execution. Yes, for one scrawny deer, you could lose your head. The Lord's justice is swift and public, designed to make an example out of anyone who forgets their place in the food chain. The punishment isn't just physical, there's the shame too. Caught poaching, you become a cautionary tale for the whole village. Children point, neighbours whisper, and even your friends start to avoid you. The law is clear. Your hunger does not excuse your crime. Meanwhile, the Lord's table groans under the weight of pies, roasts and spiced sausages, a cruel reminder of the gulf between the haves and the desperately have-nots. And yet every year someone gets desperate enough to try. You hear the stories in low voices over the pottage, the neighbour who snared a brace of hares and got away with it, the family that vanished after a poaching charge. Some people see poachers as heroes, daring the odds to feed their children. Others call them fools. Either way, the system is set up to make sure the rich stay fed and the poor stay hungry and afraid. So, as you sit with your family, chewing on another bowl of turnip stew, you dream of roasted rabbit and honey-glazed quail. Maybe you'll risk it. Maybe you won't. But you know that in the medieval world, every meal is a negotiation, with the land, with the law, and with your own gnawing hunger. And as for that rabbit you saw in the field this morning, you just hope it's better at hiding than you are at running. Sometimes your best chance at protein is living with your animals. Literally. You share space, warmth, and occasionally a midnight snack you'd rather not talk about. In the medieval peasant home, privacy is about as common as pepper on your turnips. Your living quarters aren't so much a house as a single smoky room packed with people, chickens, and maybe the family pig. Forget about a mudroom. There's just mud everywhere, and a chicken trying to nest in your bed. Why? Because animals are valuable, warmth is rare, and you all need each other to survive the night. The livestock isn't just there for company, it's insurance against disaster and occasionally breakfast. You have no central heating, so a few sheep or goats in the corner are the difference between waking up shivering and waking up only mildly uncomfortable. At the end of a long winter, you count yourself lucky if the cow didn't lie down on your boots, or if the chickens didn't decide your pillow was the ideal roosting spot. Day and night, you're surrounded by a chorus of barnyard noises, snuffling pigs, muttering hens, the occasional goat having an existential crisis. If you're lucky, there's a dog for protection, a cat to handle the rats, and a mouse or two who never got the memo about moving out. The aroma is an ever-changing blend of straw, sweat, manure, and whatever happened in the corner last night. If you're used to scented candles, prepare for a sensory adventure. You learn to adjust. You sleep through the rooster's crow, the cow's midnight bathroom break, and the sound of your cousin snoring on the other side of the sheep. It's a full house, but it's also full of small, steady sources of food. Chickens lay eggs, sometimes in your shoes. Goats and cows give milk, which you quickly turn into cheese before it goes off. Every drop is precious, every egg a tiny miracle. You keep your animals close because a stolen hen is a tragedy, and a missing pig is a family emergency. Sometimes, in the darkest months, a desperate hunger creeps in. Maybe you've run out of beans, and the last turnip is looking suspiciously sprouted. That's when you start eyeing the animals in a new light. It's a grim calculation. Do you eat the hen and lose future eggs, or let the children go hungry another night? Usually the eggs win, and you dream about roast chicken as you settle for pottage, again. Then there's the reality of midnight snacks. Every now and then the family dog drags in a suspicious bone. A rat might steal a crust of bread, or the cat shares its mouse with a grateful toddler. In truly desperate times, stories float around about scraping the fat from the pig's trough, or boiling bones until they dissolve into a nutritious broth. You do what you must to make it to spring. But life with livestock isn't just about survival, it's about community. The animals are part of the family, named, joked about, and occasionally blamed for everything from missing bread to bad dreams. Kids grow up side by side with calves and lambs, learning early that food and life are intertwined. The cow in the corner isn't just future stew, she's a warm presence through the winter, and yet as crowded and noisy as your home may be, it's a system that works. Animals bring food, warmth, and, if you squint, comfort. You protect them, and they, in their way, protect you. So, next time you think your roommate's situation is rough, Imagine sharing your bed with a pig, your kitchen with chickens, and your living room with a goat that's convinced it owns the place. In the medieval world, everyone shares everything, even the protein. Forget forks, you eat with your fingers and so does everyone else. Plates, maybe a piece of old bread if you're feeling fancy. Let's talk about the daily medieval dinner experience, one that would send any modern etiquette coach into a fainting fit. For a peasant, tableware is whatever you can get your hands on, and more often than not, what you get your hands on is your food. In this world, a fork is a three-pronged mystery reserved for the nobility, and probably used more to poke at servants than at actual food. Your primary eating utensil is the same tool you use for everything else, your fingers. Clean hands are encouraged, not because of germs, nobody knows what those are yet, but because dirt tastes bad and makes your bread even grittier. You might rinse off in a bowl of communal water before eating, but it's mostly ceremonial. By the time you're done, the water is more soup than sanitizer. Meals are communal and crowded, with everyone hunched around a rough wooden table or in poorer homes squatting by the hearth. The idea of personal space is laughable. You sit elbow to elbow with family, friends, and the occasional neighbour who smells faintly of cheese. There's a single pot in the middle. Everyone dips in, tears off a hunk of bread, and scoops up whatever stew or pottage is on offer. Double dipping? That's not just accepted, it's expected. If you see someone eating daintily, they're either hiding something or angling for a job at the manor. As for plates, the fancy folks might have pewter or wooden ones, but you get a trencher, a thick stale slice of bread used as a plate, bowl, and napkin, all in one. When the meal is done, you eat the trencher, now conveniently soaked in soup and gravy. If you're not hungry, you give it to a child, a beggar, or toss it to the family pig, who is always grateful for your leftovers. There are knives, but they're personal, brought from home, rarely washed, and used for everything from carving turnips to defending your spot at the table. Spoons exist, mostly wooden and so battered that half the bowl is missing, but you only use them for soup. Everything else gets the full finger treatment. Drinking is another story. Cups are communal and passed around, so everyone gets a taste of both the ale and each other's germs. If you're at a big gathering, you might share with half the village before the jug comes back around. It's a bonding experience, literally. Conversations flow as freely as the beer, with mouths full, voices loud, and gestures enthusiastic. Table manners are mostly about practicality. Don't grab the biggest piece first, don't elbow your neighbour in the face, and don't sneeze in the pot. Other than that, anything goes. Food is precious, and you eat quickly before it disappears. Nobody worries about crumbs on the floor. The chickens will take care of those, or a toddler crawling under the table. Sometimes, on holidays or in noble households, a servant brings a basin around for people to wash their fingers between courses. For everyone else, you just lick your fingers and wipe them on whatever's handy. Cleanliness is less about hygiene and more about making sure your hands are ready for the next round. So, next time you reach for a napkin or worry about which fork to use, remember your medieval self. Hunched over a bowl of stew, fingers greasy, bread in hand, and absolutely no idea how much food you just got under your fingernails. In the medieval world, good table manners mean not starting a fight over the last onion, and maybe sharing your trencher if you're feeling generous. No snacks, no midnight fridge raids, no dessert. You eat when you can, and you dream about roasted chestnuts you'll never actually see. In the modern world, we're spoiled for choice. Craving something salty? There's a bag for that. Feeling peckish at midnight? The fridge glows with possibilities, but as a medieval peasant, snacking is a word you don't know, and a luxury you can't afford. Food isn't just scarce, it's scheduled, rationed, and jealously guarded until mealtime. If you get hungry between bowls of pottage, your options are simple. Wait, or gnaw on the memory of last year's apple. Let's set the scene. You've finished dinner, such as it was. Maybe a bowl of stew and a chunk of bread with more personality than flavour. Your stomach grumbles, but the pot is empty, and you know better than to go searching for leftovers. There is no Just a little something sweet before bed. Sweets are for the rich, the holy, or the festival days, and dessert as a concept hasn't reached your corner of the world yet. Between meals, hunger is a familiar companion. You keep yourself busy in the fields or the cottage, anything to distract from the gnawing emptiness that creeps in when you have too much time to think about food. Children might sneak a bite of raw turnip, or chew on a sour wild berry if they can find one, but mostly you dream of roasted chestnuts, honey cakes, fresh pears, foods you've heard of but may never taste. If you're really desperate, you might forage. The hedgerows offer a handful of blackberries in summer, if the birds don't beat you to them. In the lean months, maybe you'll find a few nuts, or dig up a wild onion. These aren't snacks in the way you know them. They're small victories in the endless war against hunger. And if you don't find anything, you tell yourself you didn't really want it anyway. For the rare village festival, the world turns upside down for a day. Sweet buns, candied nuts, a sliver of cheese. You savour every crumb and store the memory for when the next hunger gap comes. Some families might roast chestnuts over a fire, the smell drifting down the lane, filling the night with hope and envy. But festival food vanishes fast, and the rest of the year is just plain waiting. Children sometimes resort to chewing on anything vaguely edible. Acorns, tree bark, or old pieces of bread so hard they could double as doorstops. If you're really lucky, the church might distribute alms, a scrap of cake, a handful of raisins, maybe a date from a faraway land. For most, it's an annual miracle, gone in a bite but talked about for weeks. There's no such thing as a secret pantry, no stashes of cookies, no emergency chocolate, and definitely no granola bars tucked away for a rainy day. Food storage is about survival, not snacking. Every crumb is accounted for. Every loaf, every onion is earmarked for a meal. You don't nibble between times because you can't afford to. Not unless you want to explain to your hungry family why tomorrow's supper is missing. The idea of a treat is different. Maybe if you're very good, someone will let you lick the spoon after making honeyed pottage for a wedding. Maybe you find a patch of wild strawberries and eat them all before anyone else notices. But these are rare and precious moments, more legend than reality. So, the next time you wander into the kitchen and sigh at a lack of snacks, picture your medieval self, sitting by the hearth, hands folded, listening to your stomach growl, and imagining the taste of a roasted chestnut you'll never actually see. In the medieval world, snacking isn't a habit, it's a fantasy, and sometimes that's all you get. Preserving food means salting, smoking, or just pretending. Shelf life is measured in hours, and every meal comes with a side of mild paranoia. In the modern world, we take preservation for granted. We freeze, we refrigerate, we vacuum seal our leftovers like a sci-fi plot point. In medieval times, food doesn't get a second chance. There's no cool box humming in the corner, no plastic wrap, not even a reliable cellar unless you're both wealthy and lucky. Here, leftovers are an urban legend, and keeping food from turning into a science experiment is a full-time job. Let's start with the basics. Salt. Salt is the gold standard of preservation, both for its scarcity and its usefulness. If you're lucky enough to have a bit, you cover everything with it. Pork, fish, cheese, maybe even the family secrets. Salted pork is packed into barrels, layer upon layer, and hidden away in the coolest, darkest corner of the house. The downside: when you dig it out in February, it's so tough and salty you're not sure if you're eating dinner or just licking a block of medieval anxiety. Smoke is your next best friend, or frenemy, depending on your taste. Smoking meat and fish over an open fire not only dries it out, but also coats it in a thick layer of flavour, or what passes for flavour when you haven't tasted anything except turnips for a month. The smokiness helps hide the fact that the fish is a few weeks past its best. If your home doesn't already smell like a chimney, you're not trying hard enough. Pickling is also an option, though it's more for the brave and the curious. Vegetables are packed into barrels with brine or vinegar, assuming you have any, and left to mature into something sharp, tangy, and slightly alarming. Pickled onions and cabbage are common. If you've ever had medieval sauerkraut, you know why it's reserved for the toughest constitutions. If it fizzes when you open the barrel, that's just an added bonus, or a warning. Drying is another method, especially for herbs, beans, and fruits. If the sun cooperates, you lay your harvest on boards, hoping it dries before the local wildlife discovers your stash. Dried apples, beans, and peas can last for months if you hide them well enough and resist the urge to eat them all in the first week of winter. More often, dried goods are traded, hoarded, or used as emergency rations when all else fails. Despite your best efforts, food always finds a way to go wrong. Cheese oozes, bread moulds, meat grows character. You become an expert in scraping off the bad bits, sniffing suspiciously at every crumb, and convincing yourself that a little mould is probably good for you. If something smells slightly off, you ask an elder for advice. The answer is always the same: just cook it longer. Every meal is a test of trust. Did the salt work? Did the smoke penetrate far enough? Is that white patch on the ham just salt, or is it plotting something? Food poisoning isn't an occasional scare, it's a recurring plot twist. You measure time in stomach aches, and hope your constitution is stronger than your dinner's determination to kill you. Paranoia becomes part of the menu. You check every barrel, sniff every slice, and, if the worst comes to pass, you feed it to the pig to see what happens. The pig, of course, eats anything, so this method isn't exactly foolproof. So the next time you toss out leftovers, just to be safe, imagine your medieval self eyeing a barrel of pickled turnips, wondering if you're brave enough to try them one more time. In this world, preservation is an act of courage. Salt is a miracle, and every meal is a gamble you take on an empty stomach. On holidays, you might get a piece of meat or some sweetened bread. The rest of the year, you're telling stories about that one time you ate cheese that wasn't trying to escape. In medieval life, most days taste about as exciting as wet cardboard. But every now and then, the world flips upside down. Festival days arrive. These are the shining moments in a year otherwise dominated by grey stew and greyer turnips. The whole village comes alive. Faces scrubbed, tables scrubbed, and hopes raised. Because for once, dinner won't taste like a dare. Festival days are pegged to the church calendar: Christmas, Easter, Saints' Days, and the odd wedding or harvest celebration. The priests ring the bells early, the Lord's Hall hangs banners, and even the chickens seem to sense that something special is coming. For you, this is more than a day off work. It's your only chance at a meal worth remembering. In the weeks leading up to a big feast, everyone saves what they can. The old rooster who's been crowing at the wrong hour, his number is up. That jar of honey hidden behind the turnips, it's time to dig it out. Flour is set aside for sweet buns, eggs are hoarded, and somewhere, someone is quietly fermenting a little extra beer for the occasion. You'd swear the anticipation adds flavour all by itself. On the morning of the festival, the air is thick with smoke, spice, and excitement. Fires are stoked before dawn, bread is baking in the communal oven, and the scent of roasting meat, real meat, drifts through the village. Children dart underfoot, hoping for a sneak taste, while the women guard their precious ingredients like hawks. Everyone's a little hungrier, a little happier, and a lot more willing to forgive the neighbour for that unfortunate pottage incident last week. When the tables are finally laid out, it's a sight to behold. Pies stuffed with apples or pears, honey-sweetened bread still warm from the oven, and platters of meat, maybe even a whole roast chicken, or, for the truly blessed, pork. There are vegetables too, but they've been dressed up with butter or rare spices saved just for this. The ale flows a little more freely, and for once nobody has to worry about running out before bedtime. People eat with both hands as if the food might vanish if they pause to breathe. For once you take more than you need, knowing tomorrow it's back to pottage. The taste is almost overwhelming, a flood of salt, fat and sugar after months of restraint. Even the bread is softer, fresher, and doesn't double as a building material. Someone always brings out a cheese that's so new It hasn't yet developed a personality, and everyone gets a piece. After the meal, the fun begins. There are games, dancing, maybe even a song or two. The Lord hands out coins or bread to the poorest. The church gives alms, and for one day the village feels united by something more than just survival. Stories are told, some true, most exaggerated, about the year the stew was so thick you could stand a spoon in it, or the time old Tom ate 3 buns and had to lie down for a week. As the sun sets and you wander home, full for the first time in months, you're already replaying the day in your mind. You savour the memory, because you know it'll need to last. By tomorrow, it's back to boiled roots, questionable cheese, and the eternal pottage. But tonight, you drift off to sleep with honey on your lips and dreams of festival days yet to come. So next time you celebrate anything with a full plate, remember, for the medieval peasant, a feast isn't just a meal, it's hope, community, and the story you'll tell all year about the day the food actually got good. Looking up at the manor house, you wonder what they're eating. Probably something with spices which cost more than your house. You sigh and chew your onion. There's a kind of medieval torture you practice almost every day, and it's called looking uphill. The manor house sits high above your village, a fat stone fortress with real glass in the windows and smoke curling from the chimneys. On feast days, the smells of roasting meat and spices drift down the hill like a culinary insult. If envy was edible, you'd never go hungry. You know the basics of what goes on up there. You hear the stories of tables groaning under the weight of roast venison, pies the size of wagon wheels, and wines from across the sea. The Lord's kitchen is a kingdom of its own, ruled by a head cook with more authority than your village reeve. Dozens of servants rush around chopping, boiling, roasting, and, yes, taste testing. You'd give a year's wages just for a taste test. The nobles eat like it's always festival day. Their bread is white as snow, so soft you could use it as a pillow. Their meats come spiced with pepper, cinnamon, cloves. Tiny miracles that travelled farther than you ever will. For the cost of a pinch of saffron, you could buy your way out of next year's hunger gap. Sometimes, the Lord's table hosts entire animals. Roast peacocks dressed up in their own feathers, swans on beds of greens, or a boar's head with an apple in its mouth. Something you've only seen in an illustration on a church wall. Vegetables up there aren't just turnips and onions. They eat peas, beans, lettuce, rare things called salads, and if the rumours are true, even asparagus. Their cheese is soft and creamy. Their pies are sweetened with honey, and their butter comes fresh every morning. The milk doesn't taste like the goat's bad mood, and the eggs are poached, on purpose. But the real wonder is the sheer variety. Where your year's menu is 3 lines long, turnip, bread, hope, the noble's table changes with the season, the occasion, and whatever ships just arrived from France. One night, they're eating lamb with rosemary, the next, trout stuffed with herbs. Every course is followed by something even more elaborate. There are even desserts, custards, tarts, candied fruit, marzipan. At this point, you're not sure if the stories are true or if hunger is just making you hallucinate. Occasionally leftovers trickle down. On a good day, you might get a bone with some meat still clinging to it, or a heel of white bread too stale for noble teeth. These are treasures, savoured and sometimes traded among your family like ancient relics. You imagine the taste of roast duck or spiced wine, but mostly you pretend, chewing your onion with an extra sigh for drama. The noble diet isn't just about food, it's about power. Spices, sugar, and even salt are all symbols of status. The more exotic the dish, the higher the Lord's standing. Feasts are opportunities to show off, to impress visiting nobles, strike alliances, and remind everyone at the table and beyond just who's in charge. Every banquet is a performance, and you're stuck watching from the cheap seats, if you're allowed inside at all. So, you make do. You watch the Lord's dogs eating better scraps than you. You listen to stories from servants and dream of a world where the bread is always soft, and you never see another boiled turnip. In the meantime, you chew your onion, look up at the manor, and let your imagination fill in the blanks with cinnamon, honey and meat that isn't just a rumour. The noble's table is an unreachable dream, but in the world of medieval peasants, sometimes dreams are the only thing that's truly filling. Children aren't spared. Malnutrition stunts growth, and childhood obesity is a concept from another universe. Most kids dream of bread that doesn't shatter teeth. If you think medieval childhood is all chasing chickens and playing in the mud, you're half right. The other half is about being hungry, constantly. For the peasant child, every game, every chore, and every bedtime story happens with a growling stomach in the background. Food is not a given. It's a small miracle that shows up in uneven, crumbly pieces. Childhood dreams aren't about ponies or castles. They're about soft bread, sweet apples, and maybe one day eating something that didn't come out of a root cellar. Meals for children are whatever's left after the adults eat. You get the heel of the bread, the smallest potato, the end of the turnip, and sometimes just the broth after everyone else has finished fishing out the beans. If there's meat, you're more likely to taste it in a story than in your bowl. You learn quickly that patience doesn't bring rewards, it just brings colder stew. Hunger is a daily companion, shaping how children play and grow. Malnutrition is everywhere, stunting bodies and slowing minds. You can spot the rich kids in the next village by their height alone. They're half a head taller and don't flinch when they smile. In your world, nobody is chubby, and plump is just another word for the landlord's pig. Instead, you're tough, wiry, and always scanning the horizon for wild berries or fallen fruit. For you and your friends, a patch of blackberries is a jackpot, and a secret stash of nuts can mean the difference between hunger and happiness, at least for an afternoon. Chores are a fact of life. Even small children have jobs, gathering firewood, herding geese, picking weeds for the pot. Every bit of energy spent means burning calories that aren't easily replaced. Older children are in the fields as soon as they can walk straight, working alongside their parents for hours. The only reward? A bowl of thin pottage and the hope there might be more tomorrow. Celebrations and festival days are the rare exceptions. On a feast day, a lucky child might get a piece of sweetened bread or a strip of bacon that's more salt than meat. The memory of these treats is stored away for later, traded like secrets among friends. "Remember the honey cake?" you whisper to your neighbour, both of you grinning through another bowl of turnip stew. Sometimes even hunger has a sense of humour. The bread is so hard you could use it as a toy, throw it, knock it against the table, or use it as a prop in a game. If you manage to bite through it, you feel like a hero. On especially lean days, children invent meals in their minds. Let's pretend this is chicken, or what if this was cake? Imagination is calorie-free, but it's always on the menu. And yet, children are resilient. You play, you laugh, and you learn to make the best of what you have. You become an expert forager, knowing which greens are edible and which are only if you're desperate. You discover the value of sharing. One bite for you, one bite for a friend. Even hunger can't starve out friendship. When you do grow up, you carry those memories with you. You might have been small for your age, but your stories are big. Tales of the hardest bread, the smallest portions, and the sweet taste of hope. So next time you see a child turn up their nose at dinner, remember your medieval self, dreaming of bread that doesn't fight back, and a world where full bellies are the stuff of fairy tales. Despite it all, you find ways to survive, grinding acorns into flour, trading eggs for herbs, inventing new uses for yesterday's soup. It's not gourmet, but it's resourceful. Living as a medieval peasant isn't about feasting. It's about figuring out how to stretch nothing into something that won't kill you, at least not right away. With limited ingredients and fewer options, your kitchen skills lean less toward master chef and more toward medieval MacGyver. Every day is a new episode of Culinary Improvisation, starring you, a suspicious sack of grain, and whatever is currently growing in the hedgerow. Your main tool? Gumption. That, and a sturdy mortar and pestle. Wheat is for the rich, so you get creative with what the land provides. Acorns, chestnuts, and even beech mast are collected, soaked to leach out the bitterness, then ground into a flour so rustic it might still have the occasional weevil. This flour doesn't rise, doesn't taste like much, and might give you splinters, but it bulks up the bread and keeps the hunger away for another few hours. Nothing is wasted, that stale crust of bread. Sliced thin, it becomes tomorrow's trencher or gets dunked in broth until it surrenders. Yesterday's soup is today's sauce, poured over boiled greens or mixed with beans to disguise how little is actually in the bowl. You invent dishes with whatever you have: turnip tops, onion skins, the green part of the leek, because the white part went to the Lord's kitchen, and any wild herbs you can find. A few nettle leaves, some ground ivy, or even a fistful of dandelion can transform watery pottage into something that feels almost new. Barter is another key skill. You know which neighbour has eggs, whose goat gives milk, and who's got a secret stash of dried apples. A single egg can be swapped for a handful of fresh herbs, a chunk of cheese for a day's work in the field. Deals are struck quietly, with a handshake, and the understanding that everyone is just trying to get by. When luck smiles, you gather with others and share a big pot, each family adding what they have, and at the end everyone gets a taste of something different, an early version of the potluck dinner. You even get inventive with the few spices that drift into the village, usually wild garlic, mustard seeds, or foraged horseradish. Sometimes someone gets their hands on a pinch of salt or a scrap of honey, and the whole village buzzes with anticipation. You learn to make do with flavour, even if it comes from desperation. The taste of a single wild apple, or a berry found after a long morning in the fields, becomes a festival in your mouth. Then there's the art of preservation. Every scrap of fat gets rendered and stored, every bone boiled twice, once for soup, once for glue or dog food. You sun-dry greens on the roof, string mushrooms along the rafters, and hope the mice are too full from your neighbour's stash to bother with yours. Food in the medieval world is about survival, yes, but it's also about pride, about proving day after day that you can squeeze something edible out of what looks like nothing. You pass these skills to your children, teaching them to recognise the right leaves, the best roots, and the perfect spot in the garden for sneaking a handful of peas. So, the next time you cobble together a meal from random leftovers and call it fusion cuisine, remember your medieval self, inventing new ways to survive with a head full of grit and a pantry full of, well, mostly grit. Gourmet? Not even close. Resourceful? Absolutely. And somehow, against the odds, you keep on going. One bowl of creative courage at a time. Imagine living in a world where black pepper is basically a lottery ticket. For you, it's a fantasy. Something the nobility sprinkles on their roast while you squint at your pottage and pretend the black bits are just a hint of imported flavour. Spice roots sound romantic until you realise you'll never taste cinnamon unless you become a pirate or a prince. To understand the role of spices in medieval life, you have to realise how rare they truly are. Today, you might have half a dozen bottles rattling in your cupboard. Paprika, oregano, maybe even that fancy pink Himalayan salt. But in your medieval kitchen, spices are rumours, carried by stories that travel farther than you ever will. Black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, nutmeg. These are the stuff of legend, reserved for the kind of people who don't have to worry about where their next turnip is coming from. Pepper especially is the superstar. If you're rich, you can use it to cover up the taste of meat that's been a little too long on the hook. If you're a peasant, you're more likely to see pepper in a tapestry than in your soup. The cost of a small handful could buy you a new pair of shoes, a month's rent, or a dowry for your oldest child. It's so valuable that it's kept under lock and key, doled out by the Lord himself or one of his most trusted stewards. The peppercorn rent isn't just a figure of speech. It's a real, literal rent payment in pepper, accepted by those who already have more pepper than you have dreams. Other spices are even further out of reach. Cinnamon comes from lands you've only ever heard of in church, spoken about in tones reserved for miracles. Nutmeg and cloves might as well be dragon's eggs. brought across oceans by traders who risk pirates, storms, and whatever else the world can throw at them. When a merchant shows up in the local market with a pinch of exotic spice, the entire village comes out to stare, and the rich come out to buy. For the peasantry, spices mean wild garlic, mustard seeds, and maybe horseradish if you're lucky. You gather what you can from the hedgerows, grind it into your pottage, and call it a special occasion. Sometimes, a kind-hearted, or forgetful, cook from the manor tosses you a leftover crust with a lingering hint of spice. You savour every crumb, storing the taste in your memory for leaner days. You joke about what you do for just one taste of gingerbread or mulled wine, though it's only half a joke. The upper class, meanwhile, sees spices as both a status symbol and a palate cleanser. Nobles use them to show off their wealth, turning simple dishes into statements. Sweet and savoury are mixed together, with sauces so complex you'd need a second lifetime to understand them. The more spices on your table, the higher your standing, and the more people you can impress, or make jealous. Even the colour of a dish becomes a sign of luxury, thanks to saffron and other rare imports. You hear about these meals from travelling minstrels, and they sound more like fairy tales than recipes. But don't let that crush your culinary dreams. Every now and then, some clever villager finds a way to imitate spice, adding a little extra wild herb, experimenting with vinegar, or brewing up a strong ale that almost tastes like something from the Silk Road. In the right light, and with a lot of imagination, a bowl of plain pottage can taste like a banquet. So next time you crack pepper over your eggs or stir cinnamon into your tea, remember your medieval self, squinting at pottage, pretending the black specks are imported flavour, and dreaming of a world where spices are only an arm's reach away. For you, every meal is a lottery, and the winning ticket, just a pinch of pepper. Desperate times call for desperate culinary measures. Enter fermentation. From sour cabbage to questionable curds, if it could rot in a barrel and not kill you immediately, it became dinner. Some of these creations were edible, some legendary, and some, let's just say your stomach is braver than your taste buds. Welcome to the world of medieval pickling, a place where food safety is more of a polite suggestion than an enforced rule. When there's no refrigeration and winter promises months of culinary déjà vu, you make do by learning the fine art of turning almost rotten into actually delicious, or at least technically not poisonous. In fact, half your survival as a medieval peasant depends on knowing just how long something can sit in a barrel before it changes from nourishing to new life form. Fermentation isn't a word you know, but it's a practice you live by. Cabbage is king, layered with salt in a big wooden tub, weighted with a rock, and left to bubble in the dark for weeks on end. The result? Sauerkraut, sour, crunchy, and surprisingly effective at keeping you alive through the long winter. It's a flavour that grows on you, literally sometimes, and it's not just cabbage. Carrots, turnips, onions. If it can be sliced and salted, into the barrel it goes. Vinegar is a precious commodity, but if you have any, you might add a splash to keep things interesting or safe. The resulting pickles are sharp, tangy, and often slightly fizzy, a sign that the barrel is still working. Medieval wisdom says if it still bubbles, it's still good. Science, of course, would have a lot to say about that, but science hasn't reached your village yet. Dairy is also on the menu, mainly because milk left to its own devices becomes something else before you can finish it. Cheese is the happy accident you get when milk curdles just right, but when it goes the other way, you end up with sour curds or clabber. Sometimes you strain it, add herbs, and call it a spread. Other times, you bury it in salt and hope for the best. Some cheeses become famous, aged, blue, or crumbly, each with its own smell and fan club, mostly the local cats. Fermented drinks are a peasant's blessing and curse. Ale is your main hydration method, and every batch has its quirks. A lucky ferment yields a mild, bubbly beer. An unlucky one leaves you with vinegar so strong you consider cleaning the house with it instead. Occasionally, someone ferments fruit scraps into a proto-cider, which can be a festival treat, or a ticket to an unexpected nap. The best part about fermentation, it turns the ordinary into the extraordinary. That turnip you're tired of, now it's tangy. Those beans that started sprouting, now they're pickled legumes. When you get creative, you even try pickling wild garlic, eggs, or whatever survived the hunger gap. Some of these experiments become household staples. Others are whispered about, then buried discreetly behind the compost heap. Let's not sugarcoat it. Some fermented foods are an acquired taste. The smell might knock you back a step. The texture, somewhere between chewy and slimy. But your ancestors swear by them. There's even a running village joke that if it doesn't taste slightly weird, you probably did it wrong. Fermentation isn't just survival. It's community science. Recipes are passed down, shared, tweaked, and jealously guarded. A neighbour's sauerkraut might be a village legend. Someone else's blue cheese might be considered a cautionary tale. So next time you reach for a jar of store-bought pickles or sample fancy kombucha, remember your medieval self, hunched over a barrel, nose wrinkled, stomach growling, hoping your latest experiment is more edible than legendary. In the medieval world, fermentation is less a choice and more a dare, and if you survive dinner, congratulations, your gut is ready for anything. When the pantry runs dry, it's time to hit the wild aisle. Berries, nuts, dandelion leaves and mushrooms if you can't name it. Just ask the neighbour, or hope the village healer is on speed dial. It's like Whole Foods, except everything is free and most of it is slightly poisonous. Foraging is the original grocery shopping. There's no convenient produce section, no brightly lit aisles, just endless hedgerows, mossy woods, and fields that stretch on forever. You wake up hungry, you look outside, and you realise the only way you're eating anything that isn't beige is by braving the great outdoors and getting your hands dirty. Congratulations, you're about to play medieval supermarket sweep, with stakes just a little higher than picking the wrong brand of cereal. Your shopping list? Anything remotely edible. Berries are a hot commodity in the summer, and you develop a sixth sense for when the blackberries are ripe. If the birds get there first, you curse their tiny, feathered greed and move on to elderberries, sloes, or wild strawberries, if you're very, very lucky. Each handful is hard-won, sticky, and sometimes comes with extra protein in the form of an enterprising beetle. In the fall, nuts are king. You hunt for hazelnuts, chestnuts, and beech mast, pockets bulging and eyes peeled for any sign of competition. Squirrels are your rivals, and frankly, they're better at this than you are. If you manage to collect enough, they'll last through a good chunk of the hunger gap, assuming you don't eat them all in 1 week. Crack a tooth? It's just the price of a crunchy snack. Greens are the workhorse of your wild diet. Dandelion leaves, sorrel, chickweed, nettles. Anything that looks green and isn't actively fighting back gets added to the pot. You learn quickly which leaves to avoid. Anything that makes your mouth go numb is a bad sign, and which ones can bulk up a thin stew or fill the bread with something resembling nutrition. You get creative. Wild garlic for flavour, purslane for crunch, and plantain leaves for, well, something to chew. Then there are mushrooms, the wild card of the medieval diet. Some are delicious, some are deadly, and some just give you dreams that would get you excommunicated if you told anyone about them. You take your chances, always bringing along someone who knows mushrooms, though village wisdom varies, and sometimes your expert is just the oldest person available, who survived this long mostly by luck. If you wake up the next day feeling fine, you declare the harvest a success. Roots and tubers are another staple, especially when everything else has gone dormant. Wild carrots, parsnips, and onions are dug from stubborn earth. They're smaller, gnarlier, and far less forgiving than their cultivated cousins, but hunger makes you persistent. You wash, peel, and boil them, and suddenly even the humblest root feels like a small victory. Not everything you find is food. Some is medicine, some is experimental. You pick yarrow for cuts, elderflower for fevers, and occasionally something mysterious that the healer swears is good for your nerves. If nothing else, you'll smell interesting. Foraging is a community event. Families wander together, baskets on arms, children darting off in search of berries, and elders pointing out the safest picks. It's part survival, part tradition, and part game. Who can find the first wild apple is a favourite competition. On a good day, you bring home a bounty. On a bad day, you bring home stories about near misses and things you'll never taste again. So next time you browse a salad bar, picture your medieval self squinting at a patch of suspicious greenery, weighing the odds and deciding that hunger beats caution. Just this once. In the medieval Wild Isle, the food is free, but the lessons, they're paid for in trial, error, and the occasional trip to the healer's hut. Cheese is your rare treat and daily gamble. Some days it's creamy, salty, and almost luxurious. Other days it's blue, runny, and staring back at you. Either way, it's got more character than anyone in your family. If it squeaks when you eat it, you pretend it's a sign of quality. For the medieval peasant, cheese is a culinary roll of the dice, equal parts delight and potential disaster. You don't make cheese for fun or charcuterie board vibes. You make it because if you don't, that precious bucket of milk will go bad faster than you can say dairy crisis. With no refrigerators and only the most basic tools, your cheese journey begins every morning at dawn, just after you've managed to coax a few meagre drops from the family goat or cow. Most days the cheese is simple, soft, crumbly, a little salty. It's what passes for a protein boost, slathered on the day's bread or dropped in a bubbling pot of pottage. When it's fresh, it's delicious, or at least less questionable than anything else on the table. You nibble carefully, savouring every creamy bite because tomorrow's wheel might not be so friendly. Sometimes, the cheese gods smile. A wheel comes out of the press perfect, golden, dense, and with a flavour that almost makes you forget how much you hate turnips. It's a feast day in your mouth. You share a slice with your neighbour, who tells you it's the best thing they've tasted since last year's wedding. You store it in the cellar and guard it like treasure, doling out slivers until it's gone. Other days, the story is different. The cheese oozes, the surface is blotchy, or a little bit furry. If you're lucky, it's just penicillin's medieval cousin. If you're unlucky, it's developing new life forms. Blue veins snake through the centre. It's aromatic, maybe a little too aromatic, and when you cut into it, the family dog leaves the room. But food is food, and hunger makes you brave. You scrape off the worst, joke about special flavours, and try not to think about the cheese winking at you in the candlelight. Every peasant learns the subtle art of cheese triage. Green bits get scraped, hard rinds get grated, and the really suspect pieces are tossed to the pig. Some of the old-timers swear the stronger the smell, the better the cheese, though you suspect that's just their way of saving the good stuff for themselves. There's a social side to cheese too. Making it is a group project. On cheese days, the whole village gets involved. Someone brings the milk, someone stirs the pot, and someone else tells long stories about the legendary cheese of yesteryear. Every family guards its secret recipe, which is really just wait and hope it works. And every wheel is a new experiment. You never know if you'll get something soft and spreadable, a hard nutty chunk, or a cheese best left outside. When cheese really goes wrong, it's time for plan B, cooking. Into the pottage it goes, masked by onions, wild herbs, or a lot of wishful thinking. Some daring souls will even age cheese deliberately, stashing it away for winter and hoping it develops into something legendary. Sometimes it works, sometimes it becomes an anecdote. And yes, there are the squeaky ones, the ones that squeal as you chew. Some say that's a sign of fresh curds, others say it's a sign you've made a new medieval friend. Either way, you just keep eating, because tomorrow's cheese could be anything, or nothing at all. So next time you sample a fancy cheese platter, remember your medieval self, grateful for every crumb, eyes watering a little as you bite into a piece, with more personality than the village priest. Cheese is hope, luck, and survival, sometimes in the same wheel. In the centre of the village, there's a smoky, bubbling cauldron. Communal cooking isn't about sharing the love, it's about sharing the only working fire. Everyone brings what they have, and what comes out is a stew as mysterious as your neighbour's family tree. At least it's hot. In a medieval village, firewood is precious and hearths are small. Keeping a good blaze going day and night takes work and luck, so pooling resources is the name of the game. The communal cauldron is always on, always simmering, always smelling vaguely of every meal that's come before. There's no menu, no chef's special, and absolutely no written recipe. Dinner is determined by what turns up that day, and which villager gets there first with something vaguely edible. You arrive with your contribution. Maybe a wrinkled carrot, a handful of beans, a suspicious onion, or, if it's your lucky day, a scrap of bacon rind. Other people bring in whatever their gardens, hens, or random acts of foraging have produced. Someone dumps in a chunk of stale bread, another a small fistful of dried herbs, and always there are turnips. The rule is simple. You get out what you put in, and sometimes a bit more if the local gossip is flowing and you're on your neighbour's good side. The pot is large, darkened by years of smoke, and so seasoned it could probably stand on its own in a cooking contest. It bubbles from sunrise to sundown, slowly breaking down anything tossed inside. Sometimes you're sure the stew's been going for months, with only the ingredients changing. A sort of medieval perpetual stew. If the flavour seems oddly familiar, that's because it is. Every spoonful is history, comfort and mystery. Of course, communal cooking means communal smells. The entire village is awash with the scent of simmering stew, onions, garlic, herbs, cabbage, and the occasional whiff of fish or smoked meat. It's a pungent blend that clings to your clothes, your hair, and your dreams. There's no escaping it. Some days it's mouth-watering. Other days, it's more of a challenge. When the wind is right, the smell drifts for miles, drawing hungry travellers and stray dogs alike. There's a social side to the cooking fire, is where you catch up on village news, trade stories, and quietly judge your neighbour's turnips. Children gather, poking sticks into the fire, hoping to snag a bite before dinner is officially served. Old folks lean close, swapping tales of legendary cauldrons past. Disagreements flare. Someone always thinks their root vegetables are superior, and every so often a particularly bold soul tries to sneak an extra ladleful for their own bowl. When the stew is finally ladled out, everyone gets a portion, thin, thick, or somewhere in between, depending on the day's bounty. No one expects fine dining. You eat what you're given, sopping up the broth with a crust of bread or your own fingers. If you're lucky, you bite into something meaty. If not, at least it's warm and filling. Sometimes, the best bits sink to the bottom, and a cunning spoon can net you a little extra protein or a surprise piece of carrot. You're grateful, though, because the alternative is cold turnips at home and a fire that won't stay lit. Communal cooking means survival, sharing risk, reward, and the occasional weird taste. And if you're feeling philosophical, you realise it's not just about food, it's about community. You're all in this together, one bubbling cauldron at a time. So next time you complain about leftovers or argue over what's for dinner, picture your medieval self standing by the smoky pot, surrounded by hungry neighbours, hoping the stew turns out more delicious than suspicious. In the medieval world, dinner is always a group project, and sometimes that's exactly what you need. Sometimes things get truly desperate. Roots, bark, boiled shoe leather. If you can chew it, you eat it. Appetite suppressant isn't a diet. It's just what happens when dinner is grass soup. Bon appétit, if you can call it that. Famine isn't a rare disaster in the medieval world. It's a regular visitor. One cold snap, a stretch of rain, or just bad luck, and suddenly you're out of food, counting the days until the next harvest. The hunger gap turns meals into a test of grit and creativity. When the larder's empty and even the rats look hungry, you start eating things you never imagined. Roots you'd never glance at, burdock, dock, wild carrot, are now on the menu. You boil them until they're barely edible, taste be damned. Bark from young trees gets dried, ground, and mixed with what little flour remains. It doesn't taste like bread, but it fills you, sort of. Grass soup is a running joke until the pot is actually yours. You boil the greenest blades, maybe add wild garlic, and slurp it down with more hope than satisfaction. If things are worse, you try shoe leather, boiled for hours until it softens. Desperation might even lead you to the thatched roof, shaking out lost grains or roasting bugs in the fire. The risk grows too. Risky mushrooms and bitter roots are gambled on out of necessity, and you listen carefully to the healer's warnings about what's safe-ish. Protein is a memory. Hens and pigs too precious, but beetles and worms might pass as supper. So as our adventure through medieval mealtime misery comes to a close, take a moment, right here, in the quiet of your own soft bed, to marvel at just how far we've come. Tonight, you've survived pottage, bread with more bark than flavour, and water that doubled as a medieval dice roll. You've braved the endless turnip, stared down the spectre of starvation, and witnessed the true terror of a dinner guest named Ergot. If you made it this far, congratulations. You did better than most. Not everyone survived the Hunger Gaps, the Famine years, or the unique culinary experiment that was, let's add sawdust and hope for the best. It's a testament to human stubbornness, a little ingenuity, and maybe just the fact that you can't taste despair when you're too busy chewing. But for all the dry bread and desperate turnips, let's not forget the resilience of the people who lived it. Medieval peasants and townsfolk survived through hard work, community, and an optimism that can only come from people who have no idea what pizza is. Their days were measured in meals, and every crumb was earned. So tonight, as you tuck yourself into fresh sheets, maybe with a snack or a glass of cold, safe water, just whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors, the ones who outlived famine, fungus, and questionable stew. Be grateful for your groceries, your fridge, and the simple miracle of being able to eat something that hasn't been shared with a rat. Because history might be grim, weird, and at times absolutely disgusting, but it's also proof that people are stubborn, creative, and a little bit ridiculous. The world you wake up in tomorrow is without a doubt a culinary paradise by comparison. So rest easy, let the day's worries slip away, and know that whatever tomorrow brings, at least your breakfast won't fight back. Good night.